Hey, it's the webinar on site selection, demographics, and all good things professional practice. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think most of our viewers are going to want to hear this session. So if you happen to be a general dentist or a family practitioner, physician, or whatever, you could just say, maybe I'll pick up next week. But if you happen to be a specialist, and I'm talking about an orthodontist, an endodontist, a periodontist, if you happen to have an optometric or veterinary practice, and you are thinking about serving a little bit of a niche, today we're going to be talking about, is there room for one more? Now, our whole idea is to help figure out where the best place to practice might be. And what I want you to know is how to understand the numbers. We have a lot of competitors out there who are doing, where they say, oh yeah, we can do a very inexpensive, cheap and dirty demographic report. I got it. But almost every time they're doing for general practice. The reason that they do general practice is because, frankly, it's easy. There's also a little bit of a myth that all general practices are the same. So if you happen to be a general practice, a GP, a physician, or a dentist, family practitioner, that all of you are offering the same services. Now, that's not really true. You're not a specialist, but you often are handling a niche, or in other words, a segment of the population. So I want to talk about that today as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because that's kind of what I do. Right, Mike?
You do it slowly, but yes, that's what you do.
Wow. Are we going to go there? I do it slowly. Oh gosh, you know what it's like to be driving and people are yelling, get off the road, move into the slow lane, grandpa. And it's very unseemly to have me flip people off at my age. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about competition ratios. Now, here's something I want you to start off with. It's complicated. There is no set number for any of the specialists, even for general practices that are serving a subset of the population that's a little unique. There isn't just a simple ratio number that you should use. Unfortunately, our competitors don't tell you that. They just kind of go, oh yeah, you'll just automatically know if they're sufficient. So to give you an example, when I first started doing demographic profiling, I started doing it for dentists. And what I found was that the people who were supposed to be in the know, people who were teaching in the schools, would have numbers that you need one dentist per 3,000 plus population. Now I asked the question, well, how do you know that? And they would say, I don't know. That's what we've always said. And then I actually did some research to figure out what the median is and for the competition ratio. And what I found was it's different state by state. But more importantly, there is a threshold for these numbers that is dominated by the fertility of the practice area. Now, what I mean by that is there isn't a number that is going to work for all socioeconomic classes, population growth, the demographic characteristics. There's actually some areas that are more fertile than others because the people are more prone to go to that kind of practice much more often than otherwise. Now, I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about so you'll say, Scott, that makes perfect sense. Today I'm going to talk about orthodontics, periodontics, endodontics, optometrists, and veterinarians. Now you may say, what is that? Veterinarians aren't specialists? Aha! Yeah, they are. Now the way that I'm going to illustrate this is by talking about, first and foremost, orthodontists. Because, actually, I've done so many orthodontic practices and tried to figure out, is there room for one more? And the good folks at the AAO have been very kind about having me speak, and lots of orthodontic practices use our services, mainly because our competition doesn't do specialists. Now, moving on. What makes a good place for an orthodontist? How do you know that you've got sufficient population and demographic character to say we're going to have an easier time? So I'm just going to use this as an example. First thing is adolescence. Obviously, orthodontists can treat people of all different kinds of ages. Even very little children need interceptive orthodontics, but that's not typically what most people do. Now, by the way, I'm going to say Invisalign and other competing practices that are types that sell different appliances are claiming that they're all doing orthodontic care. They may straighten teeth, but outcomes are not the same as what you're going to find from an orthodontist. So who goes to the orthodontist? Well, first of all, adolescents. Now, the thing that I find kind of interesting about adolescents is there is a factor that I began to track when we were doing more and more of these practices, that the more affluent a household is, in other words, the parent of a potential patient, an adolescent, they'll actually be younger when the educational attainment of parents is greater. They will also tend to get younger kids into braces. So if you're in an area and you're trying to say, all right, how good is this going to be? You have to look at, first of all, are there a lot of adolescents? And we're going to start at the metric of 10 to 14-year-olds. It isn't where your starts are going to tend to be. They're going to be usually a little older, but 10 to 14 is the best age range to determine whether or not it's a fertile area for an orthodontist. If you know that you've got a lot of 10 to 14-year-olds and you've got more and more 10 to 14-year-olds, regardless of every other factor, you have the potential of making things go. But if you're looking at the parents of an orthodontic patient, the more education they have, the more inclined they're going to be to get their child into braces. Now, I'm not talking Invisalign. I don't want to get sued by somebody. I don't want to get a lot of complaints. But there is a difference between the people who are inclined to seek Invisalign and those who are wanting to get more traditional bands. I won't go into what those are, but I'll simply say, yeah, there's a difference. So parents with high educational attainment are going to have their kids get into braces a little earlier, and they'll make sure that they follow through with treatment. And you may say, why? It's primarily because people with more education have a longer perspective. If you've got the idea that dental care of any kind is going to, you invest in it, you don't just pay for a service right now, people with high education understand that. It is also true that people who are not worried about every dime they make because they're stressed financially, in other words, they have higher median household incomes, they will tend to be more loyal and more anxious to get their child into braces. So with the high education, greater income, they'll get their child into braces younger, and they'll follow through. Also, a greater percentage of a population that has adolescents with high education parents and median household income are going to be more inclined to go to begin with, but they also find themselves in the socioeconomic group where their friends at school are getting braces. Now, I'm not trying to say that people who don't have money and lots of education aren't good patients. That is not what I'm saying at all. But if you're trying to find a place where the tendency works in your best interest to say, where is the most fertile place for an orthodontist? Those are two key factors. A third key factor is single family dwellings. Now you may say, well, what in the world does it have to do that I've got a home that is owner occupied? Are those people going to be better patients? And the answer is no. But there will tend to be more potential patients in that home than if you're in an apartment. I mean by that, if you've got an adolescent, you got the money and the education, and you own your home, you're going to have more credit, or you're more credit worthy. So therefore, owner occupancy of a home, a single family dwelling, just means you're in a better situation. Now you may say, yeah, what about condominiums? If I own a condominium, is that going to be as good as a single family dwelling? And the answer is statistically no. A home will have more residents, often more children, but with multiple children, you also have more potential patients, and that's in your best interest. Ultimately, having multiple children per household, and what they often will call as population per household, is a favorable characteristic of where to put an orthodontic practice. You get the idea, right? Now, I'm not trying to say, oh, we're only looking for people with big money, because big money alone doesn't necessarily mean that all these other factors are going to be represented. You may be surprised to know that people with a lot of money often don't have as many children. Those people who have more kids are going to be often better for you to consider promoting your practice to if you're an orthodontist than others. Now, I used to say that if you want to find the ideal ratio for an orthodontist per general dentist or an orthodontist per population, it would be basically 20 to 30 to 1. The problem is the range between 20 and 30 became greater and greater as we looked at the other demographic factors for the area. So what I began to decide is the demographic factors, more than just the number of competitors, is going to be more conducive toward an orthodontist. In short, orthodontists were stressing out, oh my gosh, there's already an orthodontist in the area. It doesn't matter. If the area is growing, if they have the demographic character that I've got on the screen, if they have a lot of adolescents, that's more important than what your competition ratio is going to be. And in fact, we've actually seen a change. I don't want to get too much into the math, but in the standard deviations, that there are more potential patients when you have these other demographic factors. That's what you should be worried about, not how many competitors you have. In fact, you'll find that those places that have more competitors are often better places to set up an ortho practice. That's not true for all healthcare practices. Now, we're not just talking dental, so stick with me. The principle is the same. So let's talk about periodontists. Is there a sweet spot in age? And the answer is yeah. Periodontists, generally, you're looking for people who are in their 40s and 50s. It's not as though people don't have periodontal needs, younger or older. But there's a reason why 50 and 60 years old are people who are doing it. And it's what I refer to the odometer effect. The odometer in your mouth, it turns over at about 40. Your gum tissues begin to degrade, and therefore you have more periodontal need. But there's a problem with periodontal disease, and that is it doesn't hurt. It's not like other kinds of problems with teeth that are impacted. You've got soft tissue that is often breaking down, and you all understand how that works better than I do. But when you're in your 40s and 50s, you begin to notice it more, and you have more money. And if you're married, which the majority of 50 and 60-year-old people are, you've got someone else who'll go, you know, sweetheart, your breath just stinks. And you will go to the dentist more often. But we've also found another interesting characteristic, and that is people, when there are large numbers of general dentists in an area, periodontists do better. The reason is nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, you know, I really need to go to a periodontist. I need to have a little subgingival curettage going on here. No, instead, you go to a general dentist and he'll say, you got a problem. And the periodontist is the one who can fix it. Now, incidentally, general dentists, I've been surprised how many don't do the aggressive hygiene that they used to. Often, they don't want to get involved in flap surgery. They don't want to go into all the anesthesia and its risks and the pharmacology that's necessary for a periodontist to exist. Periodontists, incidentally, don't fix things. They actually make people healthier. So the motivations for getting this at 40s and 50s is greater because people become more health conscious, considering their long-term care. And as you all know, people suffer tooth loss primarily because of perio problems. Now, ironically, when you have more people, more general dentists, they're performing more examinations, and they will therefore refer more often. When there are few general dentists, it's not as though they can't diagnose perio problems, but they don't refer as aggressively. That's why having more general dentists around, and if you work that referral base, a periodontist can do reasonably well. So you're looking for a large number of general dentists. So going back to that initial premise, just because you have a lot of periodontists in an area doesn't mean that all of them can't do well. They can. Often it's conditioning the referral base to understand when to refer. The other thing is periodontists do best when the population has high education. And as I mentioned, they're often more prone to go to the dentist and have more prophies, more proactive maintenance of their health, of their dental health. So educational attainment, in other words, getting more schooling, is an indicator that people are going to the dentist at a higher rate. Therefore, periodontists do better. So I hope you understand it's not just a matter of saying you need to have here 45 periodontists, I would say 45 general dentists per periodontist. It's more complex than that because you're getting into demographic characteristics that are deeper. Now, let me stop and say, if you want to know, will a perio practice survive, and an ortho practice in any of these, it's wise to go to somebody who understands something about your profession. Because a statistician doesn't know. A demographer really just looks at numbers, primarily how many noses we got out there. They don't understand anything about how those conditions relate to the demographics. Now let's talk endo for just a second. Now, this is not entirely true because younger people get endo conditions as well. But if you want to go to a true specialist or have a true specialist be considered as the target of a referral, you're usually looking for people who are in their 50s and 60s and have a high educational attainment. Patients who are suffering from endo, everybody is scared to death of a root canal. You all know that. Many of them will say, I'll just yank it, doc, I don't care. So oral surgery is one of their first things to do. It's cheaper. It doesn't take as long, and frankly, it's, whatever, a lot less pain. But you see, when people are educated, they've got the longer point of view. That's a favorable thing. But the age is predominantly important. And the other thing I found is when you have dental insurance, usually, the amount that the people can write off with their dental insurance when it comes to a root canal is greater. So having favorable dental insurance is a beneficial factor for that population. Now, it's not a true demographic fact, but there are secondary factors about people that will determine how much dental insurance and what type they've got. But it is not a thing that you can just say, oh, how many Delta patients have we got in this area that have got this kind of insurance? High median household income, however, is a secondary consideration and is an indicator of dental insurance. Endo is a godsend for people in order to, if you're a specialist. Personally, I would never go to a general dentist who's offering endo because I happen to know they've got some great skills, but they don't have the technology that an endodontist does. Unfortunately, I just see way too few endodontists selling the real benefits of going to them, and that is their advanced training and the options of treatment they've got. I'd go to an endodontist any day over a GP, even if the GP has got some good experience. I'm not trying to cut down on the GPs. So high median income, but I've also found that when there are a lot of general dentists and they're really aggressive of trying to keep production from walking out the door, they'll do everything they can to do root canals. They see it as a profit center for them. And so ironically, when there are relatively few general dentists per population, they tend to refer more because they're not quite as desperate in terms of keeping up their monthly production. So if you're looking for a demographic characteristic that might indicate whether this area is going to be good for endo or not, I'd say, guys, just make sure that the general dentists are not cheek by jowl fighting each other to the death. Now, the threshold number that I put on that is one general dentist per 1,400 population in a middle class area. Okay, when people are very affluent, that number can actually go to maybe 1 to 900. If they're very poor, maybe 1 to 4, to about 3,000, 1 to 3,000 population in general dentists. But I'm saying the threshold seems, generally speaking, to be 1 to 1,400. If you get down to those numbers where it doesn't look like there's as much competition, that benefits endodontists. Now, I want to talk about veterinarians because it's a good model for other kinds of healthcare practices as well. A veterinarian is actually a little less regulated than a dentist and a physician. Veterinarians, if you're a veterinarian, you can do anything really. But the problem is, just because you're doing everything doesn't mean you're good at everything. Now, that's one reason why we see an increasing number of all cat or feline and all dog canine practices. People will feel a little more comfortable knowing that their animal type is being treated. The same thing is true of exotics. Now, in this case, exotics are very often reptiles. Snakes and lizards are different, obviously, than warm-blooded animals. The same thing is true of birds. So avian practice, as I put, is a kind of exotic practice. But the kinds of people who have a snake or a lizard are not like people who have a dog and a cat. They're usually going to be younger males who have the exotics. There's a certain cool factor that they've got going on. They don't usually have as much money. But whether they're married or not, they tend to be single much more when they have a large number of exotics, because one of the first things their wife or girlfriend says is, get rid of the snake, we're going to have kids. Now, there are other veterinary factors that people have to consider, and two of those are, how much are we investing in diagnostics? How much are we doing in surgeries? Yes, there are minor surgeries that all veterinarians tend to do, spay, neuter, all those kinds of things. But that there's a skill set that a lot of people have that they don't want to get into when it comes to surgeries. And the same thing is true of diagnostics. If you've invested in ultrasound equipment, that's not an expensive thing, and the number of people who might want or be able to consider the want and be able to afford it are few. So therefore, it's not just a matter of money, it's a matter of the relationship of the pet pal, the owner, what they have for their animal needs. I bring this up because the kinds of people who you will solicit for care in a diagnostic practice, or one that is doing geriatric care or other kinds of surgeries, are a little different. So it's not as though people are good or bad. It's just the people who will desire certain services are going to be different. So if you're looking at a location, trying to say, should I put a veterinary practice here? And what kinds of services should I offer? You want to take into account what the people in the area already are like in terms of what they're willing to pay. Now, we know that a lot of people are very big into birds, and parrot culture is something entirely different than other kinds of avian practices. But knowing that these people are going to be inclined to want those services, I definitely would want you to promote that, especially to the people who are likely to have them. Now, there are some apartment dwellers who are very big into the birds. There are older people who still see them as being a good example of having a special need. The service pets often are going to be going into dogs, and there is a movement to make sure that they're certified. But I think we haven't seen as many veterinarians who are really promoting the idea of service animals as being a primary focus for them. I won't go into the other kinds of practices, the bovine, the porcine, whatever, but each one of them has a different attraction, and you need to be able to promote the practice accordingly to get the best bang from your buck. Now, I want to talk just briefly about optometrists for a second. Now, while they are not necessarily a specialist, ophthalmologists obviously aren't, but we've seen that optometrists tend to do best when they're focusing upon those people who come from work, the employee-based practice, versus residents, a home-based practice. We've also seen that the manifestation of the difference would be in optician output or options. There are some people who are doing very high-end frames or contact lenses or esoteric combinations. Knowing this, you have to price the practice differently based upon who you're trying to serve in the services. I mean, you all know that. But there are a lot of optometrists who believe that if I put my practice into a general place, a Walmart, into a Costco or whatever, they're going to get a general population In fact, they won't. They're usually going to get people who are residents, not employees who will come in. Then their employee people are going to be those who are near an office complex. I am encouraging optometrists to try to say, who are we really serving? And to be more selective in their demographic characteristics of their patient base. I've also seen, by the way, the age of patients makes a big difference and growing in optometrists. Of course, the potential for a geriatric optometric practice is great. And you may be doing some lighter surgeries, referring things out, or doing them in-house. But the idea is you're not serving everybody in every practice the same way. There are some big differences, I believe, in how much people have as far as their insurance. I understand VSP is the big insurer, but the number of people who have VSP may not be as high in the residential population as it will be among people who are basing their work. Now, only a demographer who knows your practice type can help you realize the numbers of the competition ratios. That is what we do at Dr. Demographics. So we've made a study is to try to say, what's the likelihood of your type of practice doing well? How should you emphasize your specialty or the practice niche that you're in? That's what we do. That makes us different than others who just have a real estate database that says, oh, I've got so many dentists over here and so many optometrists there. The problem is they're not examining the difference between the various practice types. Now, when in doubt, we have a practice site viability report that can tell you, will my kind of practice make it here or not? You can also do the telephone consultation where we're looking at different areas and practice models. They'll say, is this going to work here or there? So Mike, you've joined the living. Any thoughts that you have before we move down the road here?
You know, I think the only thing I just really echoes what you're saying is that there is a lot of general information out there, and you're going to get a lot of experts that will tell you this or that. And I think that when I run onto doctors that are a little cavalier about that, and they just spend the kind of money that you're going to spend without doing the proper due diligence, I think that's crazy, to be honest with you. I think it's really important that you consider how valuable your investment is. And if I was in your shoes, I would want to be getting as much expertise as possible on this, really crucial information before I decided where I would place my practice. So I think just like if you had cancer, if you had, some kind of life-threatening thing, you would want to go to the best. You'd want to go to the most seasoned doctor, the one that had the best technology, the best systems, not just the one that was the prettiest, not just the one that, that maybe was the most visible, but I'd want to go to the best.
All right. Then I just have one quick note on that. You just reminded me, Mike. The American Veterinary Medical Association, the AVMA, the ADA, the AMA, there are lots of associations that will tell you how many people have a license within a geographic area.
Yeah.
That's free. The problem is just because they're telling you who has a license doesn't mean they're telling you about what types of services they offer. They don't tell you the differences between the different kinds of practices. If you happen to be near a corporate practice, it's going to be a very different competition relationship than it will be if you got a lot of solo practitioners working in owner-occupied offices. That's where the demographer can kind of say, hey, you got that right over there. Is that really where you want to go and offer these kinds of services, because your competition's not like that?
Yeah.
Anyway, does that all make sense?
I think it does.
All right, you guys, go visit us at drdemographics.com. Keep an eye on Mike Green's wonderful market summaries or seminars. The reason that I want you to do that is because he's specifically talking to healthcare practices on how to promote their practices. He knows the idea of advertising. Believe me, he knows this thing about the internet, social media, content marketing. And so Mike is brilliant in this, and his topics are going to be on those themes. So visit us at drdemographics.com to find out where and when those things and those seminars are coming out. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. We'll talk to you all soon.